There's a certain kind of peace that comes with a daily routine, the predictable rhythm of life, the little victories that make things smoother. For me, one of those victories was finally getting a disabled parking spot approved in front of my house. After months of paperwork, medical documentation, and city inspections, I was granted the right to that space. Legally painted, clearly signed, and monitored by the city that I needed it. Years of back issues and a recent surgery had made it painful, sometimes nearly impossible, to walk long distances. That spot wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. But of course, peace doesn't last long in a neighborhood with a Karen. She lived 2 houses down, in one of those pristine cookie-cutter homes with perfectly trimmed hedges and a live, laugh, love sign stenciled on the front porch. Her name wasn't actually Karen, but she fit the stereotype so well it didn't matter. Entitled, loud, always right. The kind of person who complains about your garbage cans being out 5 minutes past pickup, but keeps hers on the sidewalk for 2 days. The first time she parked in my space, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she didn't see the sign, I thought. It was a new addition, after all. I waited. She came back an hour later with her hair done, sunglasses on, and a cup of iced coffee in hand. She gave my house a quick glance and walked inside, completely unfazed. The second time it happened, the very next day, I knew it wasn't a mistake that I left a polite note. Nothing aggressive. Just a reminder that it was a legally designated disabled parking spot and that I relied on it for medical reasons. The note disappeared. The car didn't. She kept parking there. Every single day, morning until night. Sometimes overnight. Her silver SUV, with no placard, no visible plates for disabled access, no nothing. Just an SUV taking up the one space I genuinely needed that I called the city once. They sent someone out to check, but by the time they arrived, she had moved the car. Like clockwork, she seemed to know when to vanish just before enforcement could catch her. I started to suspect she was watching from a window that I knew the HOA wouldn't help. They were useless, and Karen practically ran the board. Her husband was on the finance committee, and their clique of step-forward wives treated her like suburban royalty. Complaining to them would have been a waste of breath. So I decided to wait. I logged every instance. I took photos. I timestamped everything. I recorded video from my porch cam, day after day. I noted when the car arrived, when it left, and whether or not she ever displayed a disabled placard. She never did. Not once. Weeks passed. My back got worse. Some days I had to park half a block away, shuffling along the sidewalk with a cane, watching her SUV sit comfortably in my spot. I hated how powerless it made me feel. She was stealing my access, my comfort, and she knew it. And then came the final straw point one Sunday morning. I had a follow-up appointment at the hospital. Early, before most of the neighborhood even woke up. I walked out, coffee in hand, to find her SUV already parked in my spot. She had blocked it again. And this time, she'd left a brunch flyer on my windshield. An invite to a ladies' garden brunch she was hosting that very day. I stood there, staring at the flyer, the absurdity of it all settling in. She had the audacity to block my medical access and then invite me to brunch as if we were friends. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. More polite notes. No more waiting for the city to maybe respond. I was going to get her car towed, but I was going to do it the right way. Legally. With overwhelming evidence and zero room for argument that I started digging deeper. I contacted a friend who worked in city enforcement and asked what it would take to get a habitual offender removed from a disabled parking spot. The answer was simple: documented proof of violations, a formal complaint through the proper channel, and a scheduled patrol based on the offender's pattern. So I compiled everything. 31 days of violations. Photos, videos, notes, time logs. I even printed out the original city approval for the space, highlighted and signed. I submitted the full complaint package, requesting a targeted enforcement patrol on the upcoming Sunday, the day of Karen's brunch, because I knew she wouldn't be able to resist showing off her house, her garden, and her perfect little life. I knew her car would be right there in my spot, just like it had been for the last month. All I had to do was wait. And when that Sunday morning finally arrived, the trap was set. I had my camera rolling. The SUV was there. The brunch guests were arriving. The garden party music was playing softly in the background. Everything looked like a scene from a lifestyle blog. And then, the tow truck turned the corner. The moment I saw the tow truck roll slowly down our quiet cul-de-sac, a surge of satisfaction buzzed through me. the kind you rarely get in life unless you've been incredibly patient or incredibly petty. I'd been both. And now it was finally payoff time. It wasn't just any tow truck, either. This was an official city enforcement vehicle, fully marked, lights flashing subtly, but enough to get attention. It pulled up right in front of my house, where Karen's silver SUV sat illegally parked in the clearly designated disabled spot. Once again, without a placard, sticker, or a single shred of legitimacy. From my porch, I watched the driver step out with calm authority, clipboard in hand, checking the plate number against the report I'd filed. I didn't need to say a word. Everything was in place. The evidence, the legal approval for the space, the consistent violations. This wasn't a favor. It was a job, and the city was finally doing it. He gave one look at the signage, another at the SUV, and without hesitation began the process of hooking it up. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen's front yard was buzzing with activity. Her brunch was in full swing. Garden chairs had been arranged into perfect little clusters under strings of pastel bunting. Tables were covered with mason jars and tiny plates of finger food. Middle-aged women in sundresses sipped mimosas and took selfies with their flower arrangements. It looked like a Pinterest board come to life. And then someone noticed. It started with a whisper, a brunch guest, noticing the tow truck, leaning over to Karen with a puzzled expression. Another guest turned and pointed. Karen followed their gaze, her brow furrowing in confusion as she slowly stood up, napkin still in hand. She took a few steps toward the sidewalk. That confusion didn't last long. I could see the moment she realized what was happening. Her posture stiffened, her mouth dropped slightly open, and her eyes locked onto the sight of her precious SUV being lifted off the ground. She marched down the path with sharp, fast steps, clutching her mimosa like it was about to shatter. She started speaking to the city enforcement officer, animated, insistent, her hands flailing in disbelief. From my distance on the porch, I couldn't hear her exact words, but I didn't need to. I'd seen that performance before. Denial. Outrage. I didn't know defense, followed by the I was just parked for a second routine, but this wasn't her HOA buddy. This wasn't a neighbor she could intimidate or guilt trip. This was a city official working with a full record of her violations in hand. The officer said something, calmly, firmly, then pointed at the signage, the curb markings, and finally at a clipboard that I knew had copies of the photos and complaint I'd submitted. Karen's face turned red. Her voice grew louder, desperate now. Her brunch guests began to gather near the sidewalk, their cheerful chatter replaced by awkward silence. The tow truck continued its slow, inevitable work as the SUV's tires lifted fully off the ground. Karen's expression shifted from anger to horror. She tried to get into the vehicle, only to find the doors already locked by the tow operator. She tried arguing again. She gestured toward my house, maybe blaming me, maybe trying to spin a story. But no one was listening anymore. One of her guests, maybe someone not as loyal as the rest, pulled out their phone and started recording. And then another. It was happening. The public humiliation that Karen had been dishing out for years was finally being served right back to her, hot and fresh in the middle of her curated garden brunch. The SUV was secured, the paperwork handed off, and the truck began to pull away. Karen stood on the sidewalk, stunned, holding a flimsy piece of paper that confirmed the impound lot location and the fine she now owed, not just for the tow, but for multiple repeated violations of a disabled parking space. She stormed back toward her house without saying another word, her heels clicking furiously on the concrete. Her guests stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do. The music continued to play, but the mood had soured completely. A few tried to make light of it. A few excused themselves. One woman snuck a picture of the now empty curb that I stayed on my porch, quiet, unnoticed, watching it all unfold like a perfectly scripted drama. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The consequences were finally catching up to her. Not just the legal kind, but the kind that ruins reputations in neighborhoods like ours. That night, the HOA message board lit up. Someone, not me, posted about the incident. The thread exploded. Neighbors chimed in. Some shared stories of Karen's past behavior. Others asked if they could finally petition for changes on the board. A few just posted laughing emojis and memes. The story spread fast, faster than I expected. Within 24 hours, a short video clip of Karen's SUV getting towed appeared on a local Facebook group. The caption read, When you park illegally in a disabled spot for weeks, karma rolls in with flashing lights. It got shared. ALOT.by the next evening, I received a call, not from Karen, but from a local reporter who covered human interest stories and neighborhood drama. She'd seen the video and wanted to do a quick feature on citizen accountability and accessible parking rights. I didn't want my face on camera, but I agreed to a voice interview, anonymized. Karen? She didn't show her face for days, but this wasn't over yet. Because while getting her SUV towed was satisfying, something even more interesting was about to happen. Apparently, Karen did have a disabled placard at one point, but it had expired over a year ago. And someone from city enforcement was now investigating whether she'd been using a fake replacement. And that could carry criminal penalties if watching Karen's SUV get towed during her precious brunch was satisfying. What came afterward was something else entirely. A slow-motion collapse of the carefully controlled image she'd spent years building in the neighborhood. For the first few days, her house was eerily quiet. No garden parties, no HOA walks, no forced conversations over hedges. It was like she'd gone into hiding. I assumed she was licking her wounds, waiting for the gossip to die down. But it didn't. The video of her car being towed, posted without comment by a fellow brunch guest, was still circulating. It had made its way to the neighborhood's private Facebook group, and then to a few local suburban drama pages, where users gleefully speculated on what had happened. Some commenters recognized the street and connected the dots. Others asked for the backstory. A few disability advocates chimed in with their own stories of people misusing accessible parking spaces. It snowballed. Then, quietly but decisively, the city moved in. The same enforcement officer who had overseen the tow returned a week later, not to my house, but to Karen's. He didn't come alone. A second city worker followed him, clipboard in hand, knocking firmly on her front door that I watched from my living room window, blinds barely tilted. Karen opened the door and, from what I could see, tried to pretend everything was normal. But her body language gave her away. Stiff posture, folded arms, glancing over her shoulder. The officers didn't stay long. One of them handed her a form, the other pointed toward her driveway. A few minutes later, they left. I later found out what the visit was about. The city had opened an investigation into improper use of disabled placards. Apparently, someone at the impound lot had flagged Karen's expired tag, which had been tucked just barely out of sight on her dashboard. It was old, issued to her late mother, and hadn't been valid for over a year. Worse still, someone, and I had a guess who, tipped off the city that she might have been forging a replacement or using copies of the expired tag to avoid enforcement. In California, that's a serious offense. Misusing or falsifying a disabled placard can result in steep fines, vehicle impoundment, and even misdemeanor charges. The investigation wasn't a quick one, but it had begun. And in the meantime, Karen's status in the neighborhood was crumbling fast. The HOA, which she once seemed to control with an iron grip, was suddenly not on her side. Word had spread quickly among board members, some of whom had been quietly waiting for a chance to challenge her dominance. They now had their ammunition. A formal complaint had been filed about her conduct, misuse of city resources, and bringing negative attention to the community. She tried to hold on to her position. She called for an emergency board meeting. She framed the incident as a misunderstanding, claimed the placard had just expired, and that the city's response was unnecessarily aggressive. But the board wasn't buying it anymore. Neither were the neighbors. What used to be whispered annoyance about Karen had turned into open criticism. People talked about the time she fined a neighbor for unsightly patio furniture while she hosted noisy parties every Saturday, or how she once threatened to report a teenager for parking his scooter near her mailbox. Her hypocrisy had been tolerated for years, but now, with proof of real misconduct, everyone had a reason to turn. And then, almost 2 weeks after the brunch, something incredible happened. The local news picked up the story. Not a major network, but a community segment. A neighborhood justice-type series that highlighted issues like accessibility and enforcement. They ran a 3-minute spot featuring anonymous interviews, a reenactment, and a clear warning to anyone misusing disabled spaces. Karen wasn't named directly, but her silver SUV was blurred in the footage, and the location was unmistakable to anyone who lived within a few blocks. The backlash was swift. Karen sent a letter to the HOA demanding they issue a statement in her defense. They declined. Someone on the board even leaked the letter to the same Facebook group that had circulated the video. At this point, I hadn't spoken a single word to her. I hadn't gloated, confronted her, or even acknowledged the situation publicly. I didn't need to. The facts and her actions had done all the talking. But one afternoon, as I stepped outside to retrieve my mail, I saw her standing at the edge of her driveway. Her posture was defeated, her makeup gone, her usual air of superiority replaced with a tight-lipped glare. She didn't say anything, just watched me. Maybe she was waiting for me to say something. Maybe she wanted a reaction that I didn't give her. One that the investigation ended about a month later. She was fined over $1,500 for improper use of a disabled placard. The SUV remained impounded for almost 3 weeks. And according to someone I trusted on the HOA board, Karen quietly resigned her position for personal reasons. The disabled spot in front of my house, it remained untouched from that day on. No one dared park there again. Not because of fear, but out of respect for the law, for decency, and for the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, doing things the right way pays off. And while I never got an apology from Karen, not that I expected one, I got something even better: peace. That no more stolen spots. No more brunches with live acoustic guitar. No more passive-aggressive notes about my trash bins or lawn height. Just a quiet street, a reserved space, and the knowledge that standing up for yourself, with patience and proof, can actually work, even against the ultimate Karen.